Good afternoon. I'll call to order our meeting. This is a meeting of the Housing Policy and Development Committee. I'm Chair of the committee, Cam Gordon, and I'm joined by Vice Chair Jeremiah Ellison and also committee members Goodman, Schrader, and Reich. I suspect we'll get Council President Bender here soon. The committee has 5 items for consideration today, 2 public hearings, 1 discussion item, and the remainder are consent items. I'd like to go through the 2 consent items first, and if any committee member wants to pull those for discussion, they're welcome to do so. The first is amendments to notes for various outstanding city homebuyer assistance loans. And the second is accepting the 2019 Metropolitan Council Livabilities Community Demonstration, Pre-Development and Development, and the LCDA Transit Orient Development Grant Awards. Would anyone like to pull either of those for discussion? Seeing none then, I will move approval. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. Those motions carry. Now we'll move to our public hearings. The first is a land sale at 3723 Aldrich Avenue North, and Mr. Ramadan will give us a presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon, members of the committee. We do have one land sale, 3723 Aldrich Avenue North. As we know, the sale is through Minneapolis Homes. The policies for the program were established by the City Council on December 11, 2015 and February 10, 2017. Staff recommends the sale of 3723 Aldrich Avenue North to Tyhan LLC for its appraised value of $35,000 subject to conditions. If Tyhan LLC fails to close, approving the sale of the property to CTW Group Incorporated for $35,000 subject to conditions. This property was acquired from Hennepin County tax forfeited land on February 6, 2013 for $1. The staff marketed this property and held an open house on July 1, 2019 with notifications sent to a listserv of now approaching 3,000 recipients. There were 3 applications besides the 2 recommended. Wilson Molina also submitted an offer. However, staff was concerned regarding his capacity because he is behind on another project. Tyhan was the highest ranked because of their experience and quality of completed projects. The purchaser, that is Tyhan, proposes to invest $92,870 to rehab the property as a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family home to be marketed exclusively to owner occupants. The alternate purchaser proposes to invest about $121,000 to rehab the home, again as a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family home to be marketed exclusively to owner occupants. Notification was provided to the McKinley Neighborhood Association on August 29, 2019. The developer, Alan Tang of Tyhan LLC, is here with us today. Are there any questions for me?
I don't see any questions. Thank you so much for the report.
Okay.
We can open the public hearing today and give an opportunity to come up and speak to anyone who might want to.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alan Tang. I'm here to represent Tyhan LLC. And I was going to say...
Want to tell us a little bit about the project?
Yes, it's a 1-bedroom house. I would like to get it completed and have it on the market for sale this fall. I believe at the time of the evaluation, it was estimated that a sales price of $130,000. It's a structure without a garage and thus determines the price of $130,000 for a 1-bedroom home in that zip code. The project would take maybe a maximum of 3 to 4 months to complete.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, sir.
For your willingness to build a new home in the city. Anybody else want to speak on this matter? Then I'll close the public hearing and I will move approval of the sale of this property. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor please say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. That motion carries. Then we will move on to our next item, which also requires a public hearing, but this is a bond issuance for Trinity Apartments.
Thank you, Chair Gordon and the rest of the committee. I'm Jamie Radel, a senior project coordinator with the CPED residential finance team. I'll be providing you with a brief overview of the Trinity Apartments application. The developer, Dan Walsh, is here with Central Community Housing Development Corporation to answer any questions you may have of the developer. As I said, Community Housing Development Corporation, on behalf of Trinity Limited Partners, has requested $1.5 million in tax-exempt housing revenue bonds to support the rehabilitation of Trinity Apartments. If approved, these bonds will help to preserve 120 units of affordable senior housing in the Longfellow neighborhood. Built in 1978, Trinity Apartments has 120 units of senior housing, of which 105 are one-bedroom units and 15 are two-bedroom units. All of the rental units in the project receive project-based Section 8 support from HUD through an existing HAP contract. The developer is working with both HUD and Minnesota Housing on a renewal of that contract. Proposed improvements to this project include replacing the original cast iron plumbing, building systems, and a new roof, replacing unit and common area finishes and fixtures, improving common areas, adding senior living design elements, and improving some of the external features, including the parking area and site landscaping. Total development costs for this project are approximately $26.7 million. The project has secured all the financing necessary to complete this project with the exception of this bond request. The developer fee for this project is approximately $1.4 million, which complies with the city's policy. Staff is recommending issuance of up to $12.5 million in tax-exempt multifamily entitlement revenue bonds. This allocation will enable the project to meet the 50% test and will generate approximately $7.7 million in tax credit equity. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I don't see any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a public hearing, so we can open public hearing, and I think it might be nice to hear a little something about the project and your plans for this. Happens to be located in Ward 2, and I think this is some really valuable, affordable senior housing, so I'm glad that you're taking the project on.
Thank you, Chair Gordon, other council members. My name is Dan Walsh, and I work for the sponsor, Community Housing Development Corporation. Thank you very much for considering our request. We're excited to preserve this asset. Like Jamie said, the tax credit equity proceeds that come with the tax-exempt bonds are going to go to the comprehensive renovation activities that will really reposition this property for the long term. A couple things that I'm particularly excited about are a lot of the building systems are original. The original furnace, original AC, original mechanical systems, and the plumbing, as Jamie mentioned. These are all going to be changed along with the lighting to just dramatically improve energy efficiency and really improve the building performance. I think we're going to add a lot of good senior design elements and improve the common areas. And we will sign a new 20-year Section 8 contract before closing. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we have some questions for you, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And I'll let Councilmember Goodman go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It might be a question for staff too. Is the period of affordability at 20 years common for tax-exempt bonds? Why wouldn't we suggest that it be 30 years?
For the tax-exempt bonds, it will be a 30-year term. For the HAP contract, is a separate contract that's entered into with HUD.
Okay, so the term, the affordability term is actually 30 years.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
That's correct.
And I suspect the intention is these to be affordable indefinitely because after the 20-year contract was over, it would probably be renewed.
Correct.
Yeah. No, we don't know it for a fact. I said the intention. So we could, future guesses aren't facts. No, and 30 years is great to have that locked into. I did have a question in terms of will individual apartments then be renovated?
Correct. Yep, they're getting all new kitchens and bathrooms, flooring.
And what's the relocation plan for the residents during the renovations?
So we are planning to do occupied renovations. We have hired the contractor Frericks in part because of their strong track record with occupied renovations, and also hired a relocation consultant to deal with any special accommodations that need to be made. We did a resident survey and have had a number of resident meetings. And if anyone has a special accommodation or needs something to be temporarily relocated, we have funds and the capacity to move them into a hotel temporarily. The contractor will be in the units not consecutively, but over a period of 8 to 10 days, kind of goes in 3 phases. And the units will be habitable every morning and every evening, running water, all working appliances. There will be a private space as well on site for people during the day if they need to be out for a few hours due to painting or something like that. So we recognize that construction is disruptive, no matter what we do, but we think we have the elements in place and the relocation budget, if necessary, to minimize the disruption as much as we can.
Okay, thanks for providing some extra details. Appreciate that. I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who is here to speak on this matter? Then I'll close the public hearing. And I appreciate trying to preserve this affordability for as long as possible, so I appreciate the questions, Councilmember Goodman. And I will move approval of this item. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say no. That motion carries then. That brings us up to our discussion item, and this is an item that was presented last meeting, and there's actually 2 items I would like to move, and this is a substitute resolution that you should have before you, which is consistent with the resolution from last time, but clarified a few things, especially in terms of who actually creates resident councils. And there's also a staff direction there, which will tee up exploring funding potentials for future investments in public housing, hopefully in time for the 2021 budget process. And I shared this information with the chair of the Public Housing Authority, the interim executive director, the recently approved, recommended executive director, and the mayor's office as well, and took some feedback from them. And I wanted to make sure to give an opportunity for Ms. Scott to talk about it if she'd like to. And I think you saw versions of both of these a while ago, but did you want to make some comments about it? I think we might have some questions too, so thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have a pen? Pen. Yeah. So if it indulges the committee, I would like to pass around a letter that was issued yesterday by the Senate delegation. Good afternoon, council members. I'm Tracy Scott. I'm the interim executive director of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. And my comments are brief, and I'll answer any questions afterwards, but they're very simple. MPHA asks you not to approve this resolution. We communicated our reasons prior to the last meeting in somewhat detail to the committee, but I'll give you a quick summary. This resolution is inspired by and gives credence to a deliberate campaign of fear and misinformation rather than facts and consideration of good public policy. At a time when the city and MPHA are otherwise working together in very good faith to take on the challenges and opportunities that face public housing and affordable housing in this city, this resolution generates needless tension between us. The resolution also asks us to disregard federal program requirements and to violate federal law. The resolution provokes and prolongs uncertainty for the families that MPHA serves. These families have already been visited in their homes by door knockers violating their privacy, distributing false paperwork telling them that they are being evicted, and they are not being displaced or evicted by these actions. The message and the spirit carried by this resolution undercuts almost 2 years of engagement by MPHA staff to counter the fear to which these low-income families have been subjected. And finally, far from protecting residents, this action works against the interests of the very residents that it proposes to serve. It threatens more than $3 million a year in new federal subsidy that MPHA will use to repair these families' homes and even create more affordable housing in this city. This federal funding increase continues in perpetuity. So let's think about that. $3 million a year. In 10 years, that's $30 million more that has come into this community. In 20 years, that's $60 million more that has come into this community, and so on. Securing this funding for Minneapolis is a huge win for the city's affordable housing goals and MPHA's strategic vision to preserve our public housing in Minneapolis. It is really a cause for celebration and hope, and to risk losing it would be thoughtless of us as policymakers and will have long-term consequences. I've heard suggestions that this resolution is largely harmless, and I came here to tell you that it is not harmless, both as a practical matter and a symbolic one. MPHA is deep in the midst of a plan to reinvest in our scattered site homes, and we first shared this with the committee as far back as May 2018. It's been followed by regular updates to Chairman Gordon, the mayor, members of this council, and members of the community. We've communicated directly on multiple occasions through multiple methods and with more than 700 scattered site family residents. The Star Tribune has even covered in detail our application and its approval, and our own guiding principles and our MOU with the City of Minneapolis reinforce the protections to which all of us are committed: non-displacement, information for residents, and preserving all of our units and their affordability. We have made available to the clerk the letter that you have now. It's dated as Monday as of this week. One of the impetuses for this resolution, as we understand, is this letter from the senators that was sent to HUD a few weeks ago. The letter on Monday from those senators essentially acknowledges what we're saying, which is, from a factual basis, the protections, they feel comfortable that protections are in place and that we'll continue to work together to ensure that. It also affirms that, the letter affirms that the senators understand that many of the short and long-term protections in place for public housing residents through this and other processes that MPHA undertakes to preserve our housing. And it states that their understanding of MPHA's one and only mission is to preserve and protect public housing for families. So we thank the senators for their good faith efforts in recent weeks to learn more in light of their prior letter. This letter raised important questions, all of which have strong and reassuring answers for the community. So through this process, MPHA has followed principles of transparency, consistency, and no surprises. We would be grateful for your assistance today with that final promise and the anticipation of more federal dollars for Minneapolis residents. So I thank you for your support that each of you have shown to MPHA in various ways and in recent years, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Councilmember Schrader has a question.
Yes.
Director Scott, could you, if you know off the top of your head, like how much is MPHA underfunded right now for just capital improvements?
We have a $152 million backlog. That goes up every day that we get 10 cents on the dollar of what's promised to us.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question. You've put in an application to do some Section 18 with the Elliott twins, and I understand that in that it includes that the land will not be transferred in terms of ownership, but only the building will be. Is that right?
I'm sorry, you're asking about the Elliott Twins RAD project?
Section 18 application.
Right. So the Elliott Twins is a RAD project. That is a HUD.
I don't need to know about the RAD part of it, just the Section 18. 'cause
Understood.
You've now applied for 25% of it to.
They're relevant, okay? So HUD agreed under the rental assistance demonstration program that is pretty well subscribed in about a 200-page description of every step that you have to take as part of that. And with that, they allow what's called a blended approach to that allows you to get more access to more voucher funding, tenant protection vouchers. So similar to what we're doing on the Section 18 for the scattered sites, it allows you to get more money as part of the project.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And when you transfer the ownership with the Elliott Twins, will you be transferring ownership to your nonprofit, to the MPHA's nonprofit arm of the land as well as the building?
For the RAD project at the Elliott Twins, MPHA will continue to own the land and the buildings.
So you can do Section 18 at the Elliott's and own the building and the land?
MPHA will continue to own the land and the buildings. The development itself, there would be a ground lease in terms of making sure that the construction happens, but MPHA will continue to own the land and the buildings.
I appreciate that. So that can be done under Section 18. I also noticed in your application here with MPHA's application about the scattered site, you said a timeline there, and you said that your milestones for the relocation of residents would occur in 180 days after approval of the application. It would also be completed 180 days after the application. Also, the execution of the contract for removal, sales contract or demolition contracts would all be completed after 180 days. And the actual removal action or the demolition or sale closing would occur 180 days after approval. Do you know when the 180 days, what date that would be?
I want to say that, can you get to the 180 days?
Initially, it was February 16th.
Yeah, February 16th,
And-
based on the approval of the application, yes.
And your plan is to do all of those actions on the same day, February 16th now, or what is your plan?
The plan is still developing in terms of how those actions occur. Of course, none of them, they don't all occur on one single day. But the HUD approval application gives us 180 days.
Which the 100, okay. So the 180 days will be over on February 16th. But
That
you
is
could still take some of those actions after February 16th.
The HUD application, the normal process is 180 days. We often have those kinds of timelines that are given to the housing authority as part of an approval process, and sometimes those are subject to negotiation if, in fact, if there are other circumstances. So we've had things, even with the RAD project, we've had many discussions with HUD as we move along in the process.
Well, yeah, and clearly they outline also in the application letter that is attached to the file that's on LIMS and record. Everybody can have that if they want, that to modify the 180 days, they'd like you to communicate with them and let them know, and they understand that there'll be modification in those days. And I think
Right.
it would be unlikely to begin a relocation of residents and complete the relocation necessarily on the exact same day, even though your application says you'll do it on February 16th, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Councilmember, Chairman Gordon, if I can add some clarity there. There is no relocation as part of this action. It's more of an administrative paperwork thing in terms of making this happen. And so there is no displacement of these families as part of this conversion process. And I would say that when talking with HUD and having worked with HUD for many years, there's never an indefinite timeline. So while you can be reasonable about these timelines, there's not an indefinite.
So do
And
you
we
think
risk
HUD would have?
risk losing the approval if you extend it.
They do that, yep, and that's clear in the letter that we've all had before us, that they, like like that, but they also understand that revisions in the deadlines will happen, and it seems like they acknowledge that there are likely delays. Do you think if you didn't actually close on the sale of all the properties on February 16th, and you waited until March 16th, that would they would then pull the application and say that you can't do the program, and that would harm anything?
There's a risk. There's a risk, and here's what the risk means. So while we talked about the $3 million for actual subsidy that would come into the city of Minneapolis for us to utilize, the risk is the use of those dollars and the way that we use those dollars in this community. And if HUD, in their wisdom, decided that they did not want to extend or did not want to negotiate, we risk losing all of that and having to start all over. And so there's always a risk, and so we have to balance whether or not we want to take that risk for reasons that now have disappeared. I think the senators' letters have really articulate the concerns of the community. We are willing and have talked with them about how we work together more to make sure that people's fears are allayed. The families we've been very clear with, there's no displacement. And so I think that it's incumbent upon us all to figure out why we would delay anything.
And certainly, I think there are reasons to that. I have a couple more questions. Have you considered letting MPHA maintain ownership of the land or the buildings as you're doing with the Elliott twins, one or the other?
There are two different programs. So the RAD program has certain requirements, and as I said, it's about a 200-page document if you'd like to read that. And the program that the Section 18 application that we're moving forward, that action with for the 700 scattered sites, is a different program, right, under HUD. And so the requirements of that program, in order to really leverage that $3 million additional dollars, requires that we take the actions that we proposed. I do want to point out that in the application, the approval letter from HUD, there was a paragraph here that I think is very relevant to this. It said that this disposition will result in the preservation of this valuable low-income housing resource that would not continue to be viable as public housing. The units will continue to be operated as low-income housing units utilizing a project-based voucher funding platform. About half of the units are in relatively low poverty areas and will serve as a particularly positive resource to advance residents' economic opportunities. All residents will be able to remain in their units using project-based voucher assistance, and no residents will be displaced. So HUD is very clear in their approval of our application, the intention and the purpose of this action, which is to bring those additional funds in here to preserve this public housing.
Certainly, and all that's consistent with the resolution as well. My last question is, do you have any problem with I guess I have two more questions. There's a section of the resolution where we're just trying to, and both of this is just the council supporting a little bit of a delay. Just to be clear, this isn't about derailing the project or anything. The resolution says to postpone any decisions related to financial encumbrance, transfer of ownership, or other redevelopment activity related to the Section 18 application. You could probably move forward with relocation and other things and assessments and a lot of work. But what we're looking for, or would be looking for, what I'm looking for, is to wait till after the approval of a new executive director and further demonstration by the Housing Authority that there are short and long-term protection plans in place for residents that currently live in the buildings in accordance with the Memorandum of Understanding between the city and MPHA. Do you happen to know or have a timeline for when you think the new executive director will be starting work?
I think the council is aware that our board of directors in the January 29th specially called meeting appointed Councilmember Abdi Washsami as the executive director, and that the council, it will come before council for approval of that application. But the Board of Commissioners for the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority has indeed appointed an executive director. So I don't have the timeline on council. I think that's for council to determine.
Appreciate that. So that likely could happen in the next few weeks. Then my last question is,
Chairman Gordon, if I could, it would be helpful to understand from council's view, and since we have the president of the council here, to understand, in fact, whether or not that could happen in the last few weeks or in the next few weeks.
few weeks or few months, yep.
Well, a delay with HUD is the risk we're talking about, any delay.
Did you want to jump in here?
Councilman Gordon, I just want to say that we have the director of MPHA standing in front of us right now. She is an interim person in that role, but in the same way that we have an interim city coordinator and an interim city attorney and afford them the respect of that directorship for the time that they're in that position. I just want to say from my perspective, we have the director of the agency standing in front of us, and I appreciate you taking your time to be here and answer the questions.
Thank you.
I certainly appreciate that too, and I'm glad you're able to be here. The last issue has to do with the resident council, and I know there were some concerns about that you don't feel responsibility to actually create and establish one, so we've tried to change that to just ask to support the creation of a scattered site resident council, putting a timeline of getting something in place that would have more robust community engagement by December 31st, 2020. Is that something you think that's realistic?
Chairman Gordon and the rest of the committee, I, with all due respect, the City Council and the Mayor appoint the Board of Commissioners for the MPHA, and the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners makes decisions around the actions for the Housing Authority. But what I will be very, very clear, this isn't a matter of whether or not we intend or support or want to have a resident council with the scattered sites. There are federal laws and regulations that prohibit the Housing Authority from forming a resident council. It's intended to be formed by residents to represent their interests, and therefore the Housing Authority cannot interfere with that. While we can make available space for people to meet, we can encourage them, we can do everything we want to suggest that there's a reason why they would want a resident council. We cannot force them to form that. And therefore, to have a resolution that essentially says that by December 31st, 2020, there will be a resident council for the scattered sites, that is completely unenforceable. We cannot violate federal law.
That's not how I read it, but that's interesting.
With all due respect, you may have your beliefs, but I'm very clear that I'm not going to do anything or suggest that the Housing Authority take an illegal action.
Yes, and I do not want you to do anything, and the council would never ask you to do anything that would violate any federal law, and that's not the intention of the resolution. Councilmember Ellison, did you have some questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the director for coming in today and appreciate your time. I think that for a while there was a time where I had intended to support the resolution, but I feel like a few things have really changed my view, starting with the inciting document, again, the senator's letter, which I did feel was from the beginning, and I said this at the meeting, was informed by some misinformation, but was still willing to at least, pay all due respect to the senators and take their feedback seriously. I think this letter, while slightly vague and maybe stopping just short of admitting that they made some mistakes, I feel like its very existence suggests that our Senate delegation informed themselves by reaching out to you. And that they're outlining that they are now informed in this letter to HUD. That's what this letter says to me, and its very existence kind of admits that they were operating with misinformation in their first letter, and so that's kind of step one. I think that we've been briefed by our own staff and now by Director Scott that the forming of the council, especially putting any date on that, given that. You can't have control over meeting that date. That would depend on, sort of the organizational capacity of the scattered site residents, that feels that we've been briefed on that, and that I'm not sure that that's an appropriate ask for us to make, and that it's also pretty open. It's known that that the potential strongly that there's a strong potential that the next executive director will be a colleague, and so we're sort of asking for a delay until that person is appointed. And I think to the council president's point, we have the director in front of us now, the current director who's been working on these issues a long time. I think that it's appropriate. I don't love I think the very confusing nature of the conversions. But that's a problem that I'm having with HUD, right? That's a problem that I'm having with federal housing policy. And while the director of MPHA, the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, you have some discretion in how you run your organization, but ultimately you're sort of playing in the arena created by the federal government, and so I feel like we're sort of kicking down in a way that maybe there's not as much flexibility here as we're asking for. And so I know that there's a coming staff direction, which I do think is appropriate for us to pursue. But I think that the resolution, as we sort of see some of the reasons that it came to be get chipped away at, I don't know that there's much of an ask here. And so I just wanted to kind of voice that concern to my colleagues. And then I guess a question that I would have for Director Scott is, in the future, should the federal government ask you all to take these properties from your nonprofit and put them back into the ownership of the institution, and created a pathway for that, that would be possible, right? We're not sort of headed in one direction and then it's finite. You all are playing in the arena that the federal government sort of sets for you, correct?
Yeah, that's interesting. I thank you, Commissioner Ellison. While I'm not familiar with that path, I imagine that it could be possible. What I will say, though, is that the nonprofit is called Community Housing Resources, and it is a fully MPHA-owned nonprofit, and the board of directors of that nonprofit is the board of commissioners of MPHA. And so it's unlikely that there would be a change in direction or mission because it is, in fact, the Board of Commissioners. The nonprofit is only a mechanism in order to access these extra funds. It does not change our mission.
Like similar to like a Port Authority or our own MCDA.
Right. Exactly.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
So now, we could segue to discussion if we want to, so that Ms. Scott doesn't have to stand up there the whole time. So do you have questions, or should we just go into our debate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one question for Ms. Scott, and then I'm certainly happy to kick off the debate. Ms. Scott, could you just give us, first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for taking on the work of this interim role. I only wish you had applied to be the director because I'm so confident in your leadership. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your history. You didn't come to MPHA from working for a developer, right?
No.
Maybe you could just give the committee just a sense of what your background is and why you would be inherently not only credible, but we'd be lucky to have you speaking to us today.
Right. So my history, I have a fairly long work history without noticing the gray hairs here. I spent 20 years in the private sector in technology-related businesses and such as AT&T early in my career. For the last 12 years, I have been involved in the public housing arena. For 9 of those, I was with the Atlanta Public Housing Authority, and as part of that was head of strategy innovation, working with HUD, working with the Atlanta Housing Authority that had a $100 million redevelopment effort that was going on at the time, and including working on RAD, the very first version of RAD, as well as Hope 6 and Choice Neighborhoods, which is the other grant programs that HUD has in order to do redevelopment and community revitalization. And so very involved in those efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, would you yield for a question to the chair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. How much experience do you have in running public housing as the chair of this committee?
I have never run any public housing.
And are you like some sort of expert in public housing where you would be able to suggest that Ms. Scott and the entire agency don't know what they're doing or trying to hide something from us or are otherwise interpreting federal law illegally or incorrectly in front of us?
So let's let Ms. Scott sit down then, because I think we're transferring into the debate here. So thank you very much.
Well, I
for the
asked you if you would
presentation.
yield for a question, and you said yes, so I'm just
I'm
wondering.
going to take the questions, and I can respond a little bit. You know, most people probably know my resume, and you can certainly go look online, and I haven't hidden my biography at all. I'm basically a regular person. I got elected. I've certainly served on the council for a long time, and once I got on the council, I mean, first of all, of course, I lived in housing all my life, so I know something about what a house is and all of that, and grew up in that, and bought a couple homes, and here I am. And I've been on the council and serving on those committees. But I'm not in no way an expert. In fact, this is coming more from the perspective of how are we going to manage this transition so that we're protecting everybody and we're making sure we're doing the right thing moving forward. And I think kind of facilitating a community process, trying to bring people together, trying to make sure there's enough reassurances and we can address concerns, that's more what I'm doing, and it's more of the process of this. And I'm hoping that we can improve the process. Now, as soon as this came up back in May, I actually sent a letter then to the executive director at the time, and I said, could you slow this down? It's creating a lot of problems and a lot of legitimate concerns. I was also forced into it when they were going to redevelop Glendale, it's in Ward 2, to get much more into what is actually public housing, where are the laws, what governs this, what's in there, what makes a difference to people and what doesn't. One of the concerns I had about this is that it removes the declaration of trust from all the properties, which seems to be a preservation piece in there that was put in I think in the 80s, that was really important to these properties, and it preserves them and actually makes investors more reluctant to get involved in investing in the properties because there is this declaration of trust which locks it in as public land and public ownership for a long time. So this transition, this transfer of sale to the nonprofit that incidentally does include the board of directors plus one. The executive director, and it has their own set of bylaws, and it's in there. So it's slightly different, but it does, and their bylaws could be amended presumably somehow. I was able to get a copy of actually the governing documents of that, so I was able to study those. I was also able to study some other things. They're moving now to a restrictive covenant of 20 years, so we know there's affordability there. So one of my concerns that I had that I thought was legitimate is how are we going to guarantee the long-term affordability of these places? And you and I have both seen many instances and ways they've done this. There's examples of city-owned land all over Cedar Riverside that we lease back to somebody for 90 years. So couldn't we be creative with the scattered site and do something like that? While we're in this transition, I've had conversations with the new chair of the Public Housing Board, who seems interested and open to looking at options and ideas and what could happen. So all I wanted was us to be able to take a deeper breath about it, take a pause that I would anticipate.
Councilmember Gordon, we don't have any authority over them. So you're acting as though we're experts, they're not. We as a governance board of the city are smarter than the governance board of the Public Housing Authority. And we're acting as though we know something that we have the director standing in front of us who has said there is going to be no displacement and any delay will result in the loss of $3 million. And yours seem to be saying, that's not true, I know better than you. And I'm just confused to where that comes from. I mean, do you really think that the people who work at the Public Housing Authority are there to make money or otherwise displace residents? I mean, isn't the reason you go into a Public Housing Authority in the first place because you deeply care about affordable housing and its residents? I mean, you kind of start with the motivation. What is the motivation of Tracy Scott and the Public Housing Authority Board? What is their motivation to confuse residents, displace them, or otherwise kick them out of their housing? What would be the motivation for that?
I don't think you're reading my intentions at all correctly.
Well, this delay, you've heard the Public Housing Authority Director, who we've already stipulated knows what she's doing. You have her standing in front of us in kind of like a public embarrassment, trying to call her out and say she doesn't know what she's doing, and that we know better. And we don't know better, first of all. We can only be advised by those who are experts in this area. And you're insisting that we delay something that potentially could cost us $3 million. So I'm just trying to find out, where are we at where we, with no authority over this, seem to know more and are telling the people who do this work for a living that what they're doing is questionable. I don't think what they're doing is questionable at all, because I believe the motivation of the people that work in public housing is to serve residents, keep them in their housing, avoid displacement. I have to believe that. I mean, it would be terrible if you're saying we shouldn't believe that and there's some other motivation at play here. Please let us know your thinking. But short of that, this resolution is just simply to tell them we don't trust you, but we have no authority to tell you anything anyway. So we're just going to pass this resolution saying we don't trust you. There seems to be a pattern with that going on here, where professional staff, we don't trust them. So I cannot imagine passing a resolution like this, but quite frankly, I don't like the staff direction either. Is your suggested staff direction that the city start funding public housing? Because that's kind of what it looks like. In time to inform the budget process, the total annual investment of the city? Because, I mean, between the 7% tax increase, the massive displacement of renters whose taxes are going up, therefore their housing is going up, we're going to increase taxes to now take public housing on as our new thing? Or maybe we should just use the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to fund public housing and not do any other affordable housing work? I'm confused by the staff direction. You seem to be saying turn back $3 million from the feds and the city will cover that. Another decision that cannot be made actually by us in this committee. So please help me understand why a delay in the loss of $3 million should make sense to us when we have been issued every guarantee that the agency does not want to displace people.
Seems like there were a lot of questions in there, and you moved on to the next one, and I'm not sure how much of it was rhetorical. I understand.
No, none of it was rhetorical. Explain to me under this resolution why we would delay when they're telling us a delay will result in a $3 million loss.
I don't think that's exactly what we heard. I think we heard there's a risk in any delay, but I think we also heard that February 16th isn't necessarily locked in stone when the land's supposed to transfer or not. So I think that the risks, what we heard, are pretty minimal. We've also heard from others who are engaged in this that it's rather harmless. What we're suggesting is the best course of action, we think, is to postpone some of these decisions until we get some more reassurance.
But who cares what we think? We don't tell them what to do, so all you're doing is making a point.
I thought you just asked me what I... Okay, I was just trying to answer your question.
Under what authority do we have to tell them to postpone any damn thing they're doing? How about answering that one question? What authority do we have to tell them to postpone anything?
So the resolution's not giving them a staff direction to do anything. We don't have any authority to tell them not to do this. The federal government doesn't ask for our permission to sign off on it. When we separated ourselves from the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, we also gave away this authority. In fact, we gave away lots of authority, so the Public Housing Authority, we couldn't even, there's not even a public hearing here if they're going to sell land like when we sell land. So, right, we don't have any authority, but we do have a position and a role where we could play, where we can make requests and recommendations, and I can write a letter, and I can come to my colleagues, and I can ask, could you support us taking a pause in this action till we finish the transition in leadership over there, and we can make sure that we've studied and covered some other issues that other people have raised. I'm not questioning the intent of anybody to preserve this or not preserve it. One of the problems is we've gotten trapped because what we have is the federal government out here who's come up with programs to offer money to support public housing, which will allow people to make investments so that they can keep more of their wealth in the long run. We don't necessarily know what the motivations were of the grand compromises that have been made at the federal government, but it looks like some of them are because they even themselves want to get out of the business of worrying about and paying for public housing. So it seems like we could all do our due diligence together, and we could be careful, and we could move slowly, and we could at least try to include the people who will be most impacted in these decisions, the residents of the buildings, to be part of crafting the solutions and working towards the solutions and buying into the solutions. I don't know if they are at this point, and I'm going with the chair of the Public Housing Authority Board for another listening session with residents who are concerned and upset and want us to help make sure that we're doing the right thing. So that's all I'm asking the council to do is let's be a partner and let's try to do the right thing, and let's try to make sure that we're here supporting engagement of the residents, and we're trying to do our own due diligence about this. I can see that there's a lack of support for the resolution here. I'd rather talk about that separately than the staff direction. And if we want to debate it more, we can, or we can take a vote on it. And I'm happy to answer more questions you have maybe about what I think somebody's, I'm not sure how elaborate the questions were, but I can, if you want to engage more, but I know Councilmember Ellison also.
Oh, I'm happy to engage. I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today, so I just want to dig into how you view a partnership as telling them what to do when we have no power over what to do. I see it as a setup for saying you're wrong, we're right. Here we are. We're going to stand up for the residents that don't really need to be stood up for in this case. I mean, I'll stop, but I find it totally hypocritical to suggest that we're a partner in this when we have no power to do anything, but we want to slap them upside the head anyway. That's what it feels like. It feels like me sitting here is being party to that. So if you want to call the vote on the resolution and we can move on to the staff direction, I'm fine with that. But I feel like I've been part of a little pawn game here in being asked to come to committee to tell them to do something that I don't even think we should be telling them to do and that we have no authority to do either. And I don't like that. That's not kind of why I signed up here, to watch our staff, and not, in this case, not even on our staff, be publicly questioned as to their credibility and motivation.
Well, I'm not trying to do that, and I'm not trying to do any slapping. I'm trying to have a community conversation and a formal public dialogue about some of these issues and concerns. And I think some of them might be more legitimate than others, and at least we can have that conversation. And also, how do we help manage the community? So when we come out the other side of this, like I think we're going to do with the Elliots, we're going to come out on the other side of this and we're going to say, wow, we really did that right. What a great success. Well, I want to do that with all of these projects and all of these efforts we have to preserve public housing. And then I want to look back, if I'm fortunate enough to be here, in 20 and 30, 40, 50 years and say, and look, we preserved it all. And not only that, we got more of it. And part of it because of the city investment that we put into it too, which we put in the last few years in one way or another in these projects. And also, trust fund money sometimes go into public housing projects as well. But I want to make sure that Councilmember Ellison and anybody else who would like to speak on this resolution has the opportunity to do so, and then I'm happy to vote
Trust
on
fund
it.
money can't go into public housing. That's kind of like the whole RAD thing. The whole point is they're a public agency, and our trust fund money can't go into that. And we did a pilot once with townhomes. But we're essentially prevented from doing that. That's why they sought out RAD and Section 18 in the first place.
But we did it. Okay.
I was just going to say that I think that if we hadn't already engaged in this conversation with MPHA and had a standing MOU sort of committed to a lot of these things, I think that it would be worth voting for this to sort of stand on our principles. But I think that one of the things that I'm taking a note of today is that when we engaged in the MOU discussion, I think MPHA sort of met us at the table and was happy to sit down and work out those terms. I think it's I think I'm noting the importance of having Director Scott, who I've seen in the past be a lot less passionate, standing up here telling us, hey, the MOU was a good way to go. This is not the way to go, and I think that I'm putting some weight behind that as well. So I do think it's fair for us to debate and sort of put our foot down principally when it comes to disagreeing with federal policy. But I think here. We're putting our foot down on MPHA, and I think MPHA has met us at the table and has negotiated with us fairly. So just wanted to note that.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of not even sure how much I want to say or how much more time we want to devote to this, but I guess I want to say a few things. The first is that just kind of regrounding ourselves in what is our role related to this agency. As has been mentioned a couple of times, the City Council appoints the board of directors of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, and then we have ultimate decision over the person who is the director of the agency. which, as we've heard several times here, is currently under consideration. We have not, as far as I know, as of today, received a letter from the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority that would initiate our approval process. So we are awaiting, even the initiation of the council approval process for the candidate that the board selected, who is our colleague currently on the city council. And in fact, actually, that's one of the reasons that I feel uncomfortable with this motion. I think it puts us in a challenging position enough already to be asked to vote on the appointment of a colleague to this role. As much as we may trust and be inspired by his leadership as a council member, I'll just state that I think it is a challenge for us to begin with. And so then to tie decisions that have been made in the past to the future of appointment of a colleague feels very uncomfortable to me. So I would not support it just for that reason alone. I think, going further than that, this is in the context of a letter that a number of our elected officials, our Senate delegation, sent to HUD, not to the Public Housing Authority, not to the Minneapolis City Council, to the funder. So we had an application that had already been approved, that was we are working to get money into the homes of people who need repairs in their homes. And so for us to take an action that I think would be seen as agreeing with that initial letter, which was not to our local agency, but rather to the funder asking for a delay, is cause for concern. And I think especially in the context of the second letter coming from the delegation, essentially not asking for a delay anymore, restating their continued engagement, but general confidence that folks won't be losing their homes. My intention is not to send a message to HUD that we want to see a delay. I think we need to get these dollars into the homes where they are needed. I've appreciated the Public Housing Authority's patience with talking with elected officials. I think at the end of the day, we keep having these conversations because it's hard for any of us to look someone in the eye when we don't have direct control over something and make promises. Because none of us, the senators, the city council members, have that direct control to say, absolutely not, you will, nothing bad will ever happen. So I know that's why we keep coming back here. And I know that's the underlying motivation of any elected official that's trying to engage in with this, is to make sure that people are protected and that, that we have the answers to people's questions. But I also know that as community leaders, we have the responsibility to, help create systems where people can trust in our government. And when that government is the current federal administration that controls HUD, that brings another layer of challenge. So I get concerned about things that aren't, even though I know we're coming from the same motivations of wanting to help folks and wanting to protect people, I worry that the way in which we're doing it could continue to create an erosion of trust where that might not be justified. And so I hope that we can all continue to work together to get those assurances we need, like the memorandum of understanding that has been referenced, but also work together to, then help people not be unnecessarily stressed, like this idea that people are hearing that they're going to lose their homes when they're not. That's really a heartbreaking situation. So kind of a winding way of saying that I wish we weren't having this discussion in this way. I don't support the resolution. I need to think more about the staff direction, so I know we're moving to that next, but if the current vote focused on the staff direction is not one that I'll support.
Oh, good. We get to hear from everybody. Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm glad Councilmember Ellison publicly refreshed our memory of the work that did go into that MOU. I thought that was significant. I think it captures not only some of the content, but also the spirit of which we're discussing now. So it almost seems like this would be additive, but not substantially additive. And so I think I concur with that notion that a lot of this has been developed. And I would note that it was developed in partnership with our purported partners here. And so in some respects, I think a delay beyond what we've already agreed to that entails all the things that we want in terms of protections wouldn't be a delay in fact, but it would be a delay in partnership. That we're basically saying, time out to the partnership. We still don't have enough trust, even though we had a binding document between the parties, an MOU, that I thought was the foundation of working together in the manner that we think is still beneficial to our community. But that's just my perspective on that matter. So thank you.
Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo the statements of many of my colleagues up here. MPHA is an impossible situation. You know, it really comes down to just a complete lack of resources and support from so many levels of government. And I think I won't be supporting the resolution or the staff direction. I think when we talk about just finding out more ways of what the current funding is, I mean, we can answer that. It's tragically underfunded. And I think our time is best spent figuring out more, how we can do more with our affordable housing and continue to support the work of our CPED staff here at the city.
Appreciate that. I just wanted to note a couple things. One is that the memorandum of understanding won't apply to the Section 18 scattered site because that only comes into play when there's any city money and city investment in the project. I actually think it's the city investment in the Elliots that was really key to make sure that the land was held by the MPHA, because in fact there is city money in that, and that is one of the tools in the memorandum of understanding to go in there. At least that's my understanding. This resolution, the intention of it was absolutely to help build more trust and more confidence with our residents that we're watching out and we're trying to do the right things. People are concerned about what's happening with public housing. They're concerned about the evictions and when they're happening. They're concerned about what might happen if one of their scattered site housing is in such bad shape that everybody decides it's in the best interest to tear it down and put in a triplex, which is probably a good thing if we then have 3 units instead of 1. But how are they going to be protected and cared for? And there's just some more details that we could work out. And I do think there are some opportunities that by slowing this down and by making sure that the current leadership and future leadership were involved and working together, there could be a way to reach out to more residents so they could have more confidence and more trust in that. And I think I'll call the vote on this, and then maybe we can move it forward without recommendation, because I'm predicting it's going to fail. But all those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. That motion doesn't carry. I'll move to forward it without recommendation. All those in favor of forwarding without recommendation, say aye. All those opposed? No. So what happens with that now?
Mr. Chair, another motion would be in order. You could recommend to council that they deny the resolution. You could delete it from the agenda, but a new motion would be in order.
Well, I'll just move on to the staff direction because I'm not going to make that motion. All right, so before you have a staff direction. And this is just a staff direction to tee up some really important work that we have to do. I'll read it. This would be directing our Community Planning, Economic Development, Finance, and City Attorney's Office staff to work with the Public Housing Authority on long-term funding options to support the preservation, repair, and creation of public housing, and return to the Housing Policy and Development Committee with recommendations in time to inform the 2021 budget process. These recommendations should include, but not be limited to, total annual investment of city, county, state, and federal resources in public housing and the term of those investments, prioritization of projects that city investments would help make possible, and protections for public housing residents that will be attached to city investments in keeping with the adopted Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. This is a staff direction that was worked on with input from the mayor's office as well as from CPED, and I think it's something that we've talked about for a long time. And kind of missed the opportunity because we didn't do the background work for the budget this year. And the sense is if we're really going to be doing something in the budget, let's get together so that we can work on that with the mayor's office and understand and get some recommendations moving forward. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We already are working with public housing. We're giving them $9 million over a 3-year period for stable homes, stable schools. So to suggest that we're not funding public housing is somewhat not true. Also,
I didn't mean to suggest that. I apologize.
because we do.
I already talked about how we had in the past as well. So I didn't.
So I'm just wondering kind of what you're thinking the scope of this is, because we're not making money in the basement. So we had a 7% tax increase this year. So are we going to not do something so that are we going to do something less, like with our Affordable Housing Trust Fund or something else? We're going to do less so that we can fund public housing now? I'm just interested in what you're thinking by bringing this forward. And I mean, since you're the chair of the committee and you're going to be involved in trying to determine where money goes with regard to housing, I think that's a fair question. I mean, a levy is a levy. Just saying, 1 or 2% for public housing adds to the 7% levy we're already looking at, and that just makes housing less affordable for everybody else by taxes going up, especially in places, quite frankly, that can afford it the least. So I'm interested in what source, what is the investment that you're thinking about outside of what we already invest?
Well, it could include what we're already investing too. Maybe that's not the right investment. So I want this to be open and give us a chance to come back with some best recommendations possible. In fact, last budget, we did project that we would fill the hole that we created by moving some of that $3 million from stable homes, stable schools to another use. So maybe there's a discussion about what that should be. So I think that we should have everything on the table and we should understand where those investments are going to be coming from and have a better handle on it. And I wouldn't rule out something in the levy. We've done levy for public housing in the past. We ended up doing some levy, I think, when you and I were both on the council for security and those kinds of things for them too, which I would not support now. And this is clearly focused on preservation, repair, and creation of public housing. But maybe there'd be an appetite for that. Maybe there wouldn't be. Maybe there'd be some bonding potential. I'm not sure, but I think we should have some things on the table and we should have a discussion about it before we come back with something on the put in the budget that comes through the mayor's office. And this is trying to tee it up in a thoughtful, careful, and deliberative way. And when they come back, then we'll have a chance to look at what the recommendations are, and you could weigh in on what's acceptable and not acceptable, and we could have a debate there. But I'm not prepared to come back thinking I know what the recommendations are going to be today.
Mr. Chair, for every item that we want in the budget, are we going to put together a staff work team to determine how we can put something into the budget? Because in 1 week, we've already done it twice. So I'm just wondering, what's the next thing? I would assume Vision Zero is going to have a work team to put together to determine how we're going to do that. Just because I'm sitting next to Lisa. It could be in any area. It could be in public health. Are we just going to continue to put together work teams to determine what the budget requests are going to be? Is that kind of what we're thinking now is the new thing to do?
I can't think for all of us.
We did one yesterday, so.
Homelessness is a critical problem in our city. Deeply affordable housing is an incredible need that we have right now. We're focused on that. We talk about how it's such a big priority. Absolutely, it's something that we need to work on. And I think by getting some people together, it's going to help us. Maybe we're going to find out that Vision Zero is also that critically important, and we should have a work team working on that. I forget what work group we just started in ADRS, but I think we came up with something to help small businesses. So I'm not sure where we'll stop or where we'll go. But I think this is a critically important need. I think we need to focus some attention and resources here and bring together a team. I think we saw in the past years we're not doing this work in advance, made it harder for us to have something clear and an ask that we could have together where the city could come with MPHA and we could say, we think this is a good plan and it will provide support. It's work
So the one thing I'll say about that is I totally agree with you that not doing the work in advance on the budget is one of the biggest problems, which is why biennial budgeting was so important, so that 1 year we can do work like this and the next year we could actually adopt a budget, but you were the person who didn't want to do that. So we have a budget every year now, and for like 5 minutes, staff aren't working on the budget. I would guess Mr. Frank can tell me, when is your budget information due to the mayor's office?
We have our first work that's already underway. Some is due, I think, in March.
in March, is what he said. So they just finished the budget in December, and now they're moving towards March, and now you're adding a work team on this. I just want to point out that biennial budgeting would have allowed us to have a year to do this kind of thing, but instead they're now going to be asked to create a work team to come up with some budget thing in addition to all the other budget things they are willing and needing to do. So, fine. Just tell them to just work on work teams nonstop on budget items.
Any other discussion? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I take Councilmember Goodman's point about sort of these one-off directions to staff, and there have been a lot of them. I do think, though, that in the discussions with this sort of summary that we've seen from housing that they're working on around their funding and the discussions we're seeing in our community and among colleagues, that there is a lot of interest in longer term affordability and permanent affordability and supporting public ownership of land and housing. And so I'm happy to support this staff direction. I don't know how much capacity it's really asking for. And I think as we move forward, I think we do need to continue to do those check-ins and make sure we know what we're really asking for and if it is reasonable or possible to complete the work. But with the understanding that it would be a potential extension of the kinds of discussions that are already happening around housing. We have this very long-term affordability study happening. I know that this is intended to inform the budget process that's coming up. I actually think that this is going to be a 2-year budget this year. So there may be some urgency for some of the things that, council members wanted to have this term funded in a budget. So anyway, I'm willing to support the staff direction. I would look to staff to see what's really possible between now and those budget discussions with the mayor. But I think at the least it does signal to Mayor Fry that we are willing partners here on the council to continue to support this movement toward long-term affordability, to partnerships with the Public Housing Authority like Stable Homes, Stable Schools. So I'm okay to support that.
I don't see any other discussion on that item then. So on the staff direction, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
All right, move to forward that with, so that's a failed vote, 3-3. That's how I heard it. That's how, hopefully the clerks agree with that. Could we move this forward without recommendation? All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? That passes. And then seeing no further business before that, this meeting is adjourned.